The heavy doors of Orion Station's docking bay groaned as they hissed open, releasing a blast of pressurized air that surged out into the cold expanse of space. The scent that followed was unmistakable: burnt plasma coils, overcooked protein rations, and something far more unsettling: the metallic tang of fear. Zhos stepped onto the deck with the silence of a predator, her boots echoing on the steel-plated floor, each step measured and deliberate. As she moved, the noise of the bustling port seemed to fade, conversations trailing off, feet halting mid-stride. Eyes flicked in her direction, eyes that widened in a mix of awe and terror before hastily darting away. It had always been this way, but today the tension in the air felt thicker than usual. The whispers were already spreading like wildfire. "That's her," someone muttered under their breath, barely a breath of sound but enough for Zhos to hear. "The Butcher of Zhos." Zhos' long, pointed ears twitched ever so slightly. It was a sound she had grown used to over the years. Rumors, lies, stories of her exploits that had become more legend than fact, each retelling more absurd than the last. The truth, far simpler. She was a warrior, a soldier, but did she drink the blood of her enemies? Did she wait in the dark for the next kill? Ridiculous. She preferred spiced nebula tea over blood. The crowd parted before her as if commanded by an unseen force, instinctively stepping aside to avoid the chilling presence she emanated. It was a well-oiled machine of avoidance, honed over countless encounters across the galaxy. But today was different. Today, someone stood still. A human. He was tall but lean, his brown hair a tousled mess. His jacket, stained with something that smelled faintly like oil and deeply familiar, suggested someone who had seen better days. He stood directly in her path, holding a crate that looked like it had survived far too many rough landings. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long while, Zhos was faced with a man who didn't shrink back. Instead, he sighed. "Fantastic," he muttered under his breath, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Another galactic terror blocking my way. This day just keeps getting better." Zhos paused, her brows knitting together for a split second. She scanned him. No military uniform, no hardened bounty hunter posture, no weapons, no armor. Just a cargo hauler standing there completely unfazed. This was interesting. "Move," she said, her voice low, steady. It was the voice of someone who was used to being obeyed. But this man didn't budge. Instead, he shifted the weight of the crate, grunting dramatically. "Listen, lady," he said, his tone now a mix of impatience and exhaustion. "I've had a long day. My arms are about 5 minutes away from falling off. So unless you plan on moving, I'm either going to drop this crate on your boots or on my own foot. And honestly, I'm not a fan of either option." Zhos' eyes narrowed. For the first time in a long while, she felt something unfamiliar stir within her, a flicker of confusion. Everyone was afraid of her, everyone. But not this man. He didn't cower. He didn't shrink. He wasn't afraid of her. "You're not afraid of me?" she said, her voice almost a question. The man blinked, as if only now realizing the weight of the moment. He looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes traced the contours of her armor, the dangerous stillness of her stance, the air of lethal intent she exuded. And then he just shrugged. "You ever had a cargo hold to pressurize mid-flight?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Zhos frowned, her mind still processing the lack of fear in his presence. "No," she answered, her voice flat. "Ever had to explain to a customs officer why half your shipment of planet grain is now floating somewhere in deep space?" he continued, shaking his head. "No? Well, congratulations. You're not the most terrifying thing I've dealt with today." Zhos blinked, her mouth parted slightly in surprise. For the first time, she was taken aback. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice softened by the hint of genuine curiosity. The man exhaled and set the crate down with a grunt. He stretched his arms, flexing his sore muscles. "Max Carter," he said. "Professional hauler, part-time problem magnet, and full-time survivor of ridiculous workplace disasters." Zhos considered him for a long moment, and then, slowly, extended her hand. "Zhos," she said simply. "Nice to meet you." Max looked at her outstretched hand, and for a moment he hesitated. The legend of Zhos, the Butcher of Zhos, loomed large in his mind, but finally, with a sigh that spoke of long years of chaos, he shook her hand. "Max," he said again, "now unless you're about to kill me, I'd really like to get this crate to dock C-17 before my client docks my pay." Zhos took a slow step back, her mind already processing. She considered his request, and then nodded. "I will walk with you," she said, her voice carrying a hint of authority that most would have obeyed without question. Max raised an eyebrow, then looked at her and the onlookers who were still staring with wide eyes. "Oh, sure. No offense, but you do know people are staring at me like I just befriended an apex predator, right?" Zhos glanced at the crowd. Some were visibly trembling, others had their mouths open, and one particularly dramatic traveler had fainted right into a noodle stand. "That is not my problem," she replied, turning back to Max, her voice calm. Max chuckled despite the ridiculousness of it all. "Fair enough," he muttered. "But if I get thrown out of a bar later because of this, I'm blaming you." Zhos smirked, just a little, but it was there. Noted. And so, side by side, the most feared warrior in the galaxy and a cargo hauler with terrible luck walked through Orion Station, leaving behind a crowd of bewildered, speechless onlookers. They would be talking about this moment for weeks. Max Carter wasn't sure if this was his worst decision yet, but something told him that it probably was. Max's heart still hadn't returned to its normal rhythm when he and Zhos made their way through the bustling corridors of Orion Station. The buzz of the crowd around them was palpable, but it felt like an unspoken rule. As long as Zhos walked beside him, no one dared get too close. He could practically hear the hum of anxious whispers from all sides. "They're not even trying to hide it," Max muttered under his breath, glancing at the wide-eyed passers-by who were sneaking glances at him, at them. "Like I've just adopted a living weapon." Zhos's eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the crowd without ever missing a beat. "They fear me," she said simply, her voice as quiet and implacable as ever. "It makes things efficient." Max couldn't argue with that. As the crowd parted to avoid them, the faint buzz of hushed voices returned, tinged with awe and trepidation. "Why do they fear you?" Max asked, his curiosity finally getting the better of him. He'd seen people's reactions to Zhos before: fear, reverence, and outright avoidance, but hearing her speak about it so casually stirred something in him. Zhos didn't answer immediately. She kept her gaze fixed on the far end of the hallway, her long ears twitching as if she were listening for something Max couldn't hear. "It is complicated," she finally said, her voice quieter this time. Max wasn't satisfied with that. His mind raced through the possibilities, but there was something about her guarded tone that made him hold his tongue. He knew better than to push her when she was like this. "Right. Complicated," Max muttered. "A lot of things are. Like why I'm still here, walking with the galaxy's most dangerous warrior when I could be anywhere else." He flashed her a grin, hoping to get at least a fraction of her attention. Zhos didn't respond. She didn't need to. But Max could have sworn he saw the faintest flicker of amusement in her eyes, a slight glint that could have been a smile, or perhaps a warning. They arrived at Dock C-17 in a relative silence. The ship before them, the Lucky Break, looked like something that had been through more than a few rough patches. The mismatched panels and dents on the hull were a testament to Max's adventures. or rather, misadventures. He had no illusions about the state of his ship. It was a far cry from the sleek, pristine vessels most people flew in. The cargo ramp was already down, and standing at the base, arms crossed, was Captain Relo, the ship's leader. She didn't look happy. Then again, she rarely did when Max was involved. "You're late," Relo said, her voice like a sharp blade. Her violet eyes locked onto Max with a fierce intensity that could cut glass. Max grinned, his fingers still gripping the crate. "Technically, I'm right on time. I just got here." Relo didn't flinch at his flippancy. "I don't care for your technicalities. What I care about is why she's here," she said, eyeing Zer with a cold calculation. Zer met Relo's gaze without a hint of hesitation. "I required an escort," she said, her voice calm and unyielding. Relo's eyes narrowed. "Max, I swear, if she's here to kill us, I'm throwing you out of an airlock." Max rolled his eyes and stepped forward. "I'm just the escort, remember? She didn't even bring a weapon." Relo turned to Zer, her expression tight. "You don't carry weapons?" Zer's lips twitched, the slightest of smiles. Barely perceptible, but it was there. "I don't need them." Max couldn't help but chuckle. He could practically hear Relo's brain grinding as she processed that information. "We really are going to die, aren't we?" Zer ignored him, her gaze drifting past Relo and to the ship's engines. She was already lost in thought, something darker behind her eyes. Relo crossed her arms and let out a long sigh. "Well, if you're here to make Max's life even more complicated than it already is, welcome aboard, I guess." Max smirked, setting the crate down with a clunk. "It's good to be back, Captain." Before Relo could respond, Max's comm unit buzzed in his ear. The familiar voice of his employer crackled through the line. "Carter, you've got 5 minutes to get your butt to the warehouse on level 3, his boss barked. "And you better not be wasting time with your little escorts." Max winced. "On it, boss," he muttered, glancing at Zer. "I'll be back. I swear, if I don't make this delivery, I might just be dead before I can get to the bar." Relo raised an eyebrow. "Dead? What kind of trouble have you gotten yourself into this time?" Max didn't answer, just gave her a sarcastic grin before turning on his heel and heading for the exit. As he walked toward the warehouse, something prickled the back of his neck. He paused, looking around the crowded dock, feeling the hairs stand up. The usual hum of station life was still there, too many voices, too many people, but something felt off. Zer, always alert, noticed it too. She stepped closer, her violet eyes scanning the surroundings with unnerving precision. Max's heart skipped. "What is it?" Zer's voice was low, a thread of tension in it. "We're being followed." Max's stomach dropped. "Followed? By who?" "I don't know," she replied, her gaze never leaving the crowd. "But I'm about to find out." Before Max could protest, Zer was already moving, gliding through the crowd like a shadow. Her every step was precise, calculated, and unnervingly fast. Max cursed under his breath and ran after her, his mind racing. They turned a corner into a quieter part of the station, where the noise faded to a distant hum. Max's footsteps echoed off the walls, his pulse quickening, as he realized that this wasn't just a casual chase. Someone was closing in on them. Zer's ears twitched. She stopped abruptly, just as a figure appeared from the shadows. A bounty hunter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his armor gleaming with the reflection of the station lights. His eyes locked onto Zer with cold, calculating malice. "Did you really think you could escape the Syndicate?" The bounty hunter growled, his voice a rasp of disdain. "You've been marked, Butcher. Time to collect your bounty." Max's breath hitched. He hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly. "Syndicate," he whispered, looking from Zer to the bounty hunter. "What the hell is going on?" Zer didn't flinch. She simply stepped forward, her posture predatory. "You made a mistake. she said, her voice as icy as the steel beneath their feet. The bounty hunter smirked. I don't think so. In a flash, Zur was on him, moving so fast Max couldn't follow. A single motion, and the hunter was disarmed, his weapon flying across the hall and skidding to a stop several meters away. Max blinked. Damn! Zur didn't respond. She turned to Max, her expression unreadable, as the bounty hunter groaned on the floor. Get to the warehouse, she said, her tone as direct as ever. I'll handle this. Max nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. I'll just go then. As he made his way back toward the warehouse, his mind raced. The Syndicate? Bounty hunters? What had he gotten himself into? And more importantly, what was Zir running from? Max didn't hesitate. His legs carried him swiftly through the winding corridors of Orion Station, his mind racing, heart thumping in his chest. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion. Syndicate mercenaries, bounty hunters, and the ever-present mysterious Zir. Every step he took felt heavier, as if the station itself was closing in on him. He couldn't understand it. Why was Zir being hunted? What was the Syndicate's interest in someone like her? She didn't look like a criminal, let alone a galactic fugitive. Yet here they were, a bounty hunter on her tail and more surely coming. Max's comm unit buzzed in his ear. It was his boss again, Captain Relo's voice coming through sharply. Carter, where the hell are you? You're running out of time, Max cursed under his breath. On my way, Captain, he muttered, trying to sound calm as he pushed forward. His thoughts swirled. He needed to finish the damn delivery, get this crate off his hands, and then maybe, just maybe, he could focus on what the hell was really going on. The warehouse was up ahead. Max rounded the corner and nearly collided with the door, his hand slamming into the terminal to open it. The familiar smell of metal and old cargo greeted him. He stepped inside, immediately spotting his contact waiting by a stack of crates. The contact, a tall, lean man with a permanent frown etched on his face, barely glanced up as Max approached. You're late, he said, his voice flat. Max didn't bother with small talk. He placed the crate down with a thud, more concerned with the feeling of something looming over him, something dangerous, something bigger than just a simple cargo run. You got the credits? Max asked, trying to push aside his mounting unease. The man nodded, his gaze flicking toward Max briefly before settling on the crate. I do, but it's late. We don't have time for chit-chat. Max could feel the tension tightening around him, the air thick with the sense that something was about to break. As he took a step toward the man to finalize the deal, the door to the warehouse slammed open. Max spun around to see a dozen figures standing in the doorway, their black armor glinting in the dim light. The air shifted, thick with the weight of violence. He knew exactly who they were before the leader stepped forward. Mercenaries. Syndicate mercenaries. Max's heart dropped. He didn't have time to even consider running. They were already on him. We have business with the Butcher, the leader snarled, his voice deep and menacing. You'll be a bonus, human! Max's pulse quickened. He knew this wasn't just a bad day. It was the start of something much worse. Before Max could move, a blinding light filled the warehouse. He barely had time to react when Zir appeared in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the light. She was calm, unflinching, a true force of nature. Her armor gleamed, and her violet eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. Zir! Max shouted, his voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. They're after you! Zir didn't wait for him to finish. With a single, swift movement, she reached for her belt and pulled out 2 knives, their edges gleaming in the harsh light. She tossed one in the air, caught it with a perfect flick of her wrist, and then, without so much as a glance at Max, she lunged forward. The first mercenary barely had time to raise his weapon before she was upon him, moving with lethal grace. Her blade sliced through the air, disarming him with ease before she drove it into his side with a fluid motion that left no room for mercy. Max's breath hitched as he watched her dismantle the mercenaries, each movement precise and deadly. There was no hesitation, no fear, just the cold efficiency of a warrior who had seen too much bloodshed to care about anything but survival. The mercenaries began to fight back, but they were no match for her speed and skill. One by one they fell, their weapons discarded as she turned the warehouse into a scene of chaos. Max was frozen. His mind tried to process what he was seeing, but it was all too much. This wasn't just a woman, this was a legend, a nightmare. And here she was, standing between him and certain death. It wasn't until the last mercenary crumpled to the ground, unconscious, that Zir finally stopped. She stood there, breathing evenly, not a scratch on her. Her gaze shifted to Max, who was still standing there, wide-eyed. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice cool and detached, as though this was just another day in the life of someone who had killed countless people without a second thought. Max swallowed hard. I don't even know what to say." Zir didn't respond. She turned back to the crates, her movements almost mechanical as she began to inspect the cargo. "You're late." Max blinked. "I'm late? Zir didn't look at him as she spoke, her tone unbothered. "You're too slow. It's not about the delivery anymore." Max stared at her, his mind racing. "What do you mean? Who are these people? The Syndicate? What's going on, Zir?" Zir's eyes flicked back to him, her gaze sharp and calculating. She studied him for a long moment before answering. "They're not after the cargo," she said, her voice low. "They're after me." Max's stomach dropped. The truth hit him like a blast of cold air. "You? Why? What did you do?" Zir didn't flinch, her face unreadable. "I didn't do anything," she said, the coldness of her voice sending a shiver down his spine. "But they want me, and I will never go back." Max's confusion deepened, but before he could press her further, the door to the warehouse slammed open again. More mercenaries. Zir's hand went instinctively to her weapons, her body tensing like a coiled spring. Max's heart pounded in his chest. There was no time to think. They had to move, and fast. "Max!" Zir said, her voice firm. "We need to leave, now!" Max nodded, his brain still racing to catch up. He followed her as she led the way, moving quickly and efficiently through the maze of crates toward the exit. But as they approached the door, Max couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was at play, something far more dangerous than just a few Syndicate mercenaries. Max's pulse hammered in his ears as he followed Zir through the narrow, dimly lit corridors of the station. The sound of heavy boots echoed behind them, more mercenaries, the same deadly faces, the same cold intent. But this time, it felt different. Max could sense it in the way Zir moved, in the tightness of her shoulders. Something was closing in on them, something worse than just the Syndicate. "Keep up," Zir said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't need to look back to know Max was still there. She could hear his every breath, every footstep. It was instinct for her now, this awareness of the world around her. Max had yet to catch up. "I'm trying!" Max hissed, his legs burning as he pushed himself to match her pace. "You're not exactly giving me time to breathe here, you know." Zir didn't respond, but Max could feel her presence at the front of the line, a silent shadow leading him deeper into the maze of Orion's station. He thought of the mercenaries they'd just left behind, the ones Zir had taken out with ease, and his mind started to piece things together. The Syndicate had hired bounty hunters to take her down. But why? What made her so valuable? What made her worth killing for? He'd thought he was simply helping a tough warrior with a cargo run. Now he was running for his life alongside a living legend. He had a sinking feeling that this wouldn't end quietly. They reached a service lift at the end of the hallway, and Zir pushed the button with a quick jab. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing an empty shaft. She stepped in without hesitation, her movements fluid, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Max followed, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The lift doors slammed shut with a metallic clang, and the lift began its descent. For a moment, the world outside seemed to still. Max allowed himself a brief moment to catch his breath. "What's going on, Zer?" he asked, his voice low. "Why are they after you? What's so special about you?" Zer didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the floor as the lift descended deeper into the bowels of the station. "I'm not special," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I'm a weapon, a product, and the Syndicate doesn't like it when someone walks away from their control." Max frowned, not quite understanding. "A product? A weapon? You don't look like a tool." Zer's sharp violet eyes flicked to him for the briefest of moments, her face unreadable. "I was created for war," she said quietly. "But I don't belong to them. I don't belong to anyone." The word struck Max like a blow. He could see it now. This wasn't just some hardened warrior, a soldier fighting for glory. This was a woman running from her past, trying to carve out a future where she didn't have to answer to anyone. The lift slowed with a soft hiss, and the doors slid open. They stepped out into a dimly lit corridor, far from the busy hustle of the station above them. The air was colder here, thicker with the scent of oil and old machinery. Zer moved ahead, her every step purposeful. Max followed, trying to match her urgency, but his mind kept wandering back to the conversation they'd just had. "You still haven't answered my question," he pressed, voice tinged with frustration. "Why the hell is the Syndicate after you? They obviously think you're important." Zer stopped abruptly, turning to face him. For a moment, Max thought she was about to give him the cold shoulder, but then her gaze softened, just a fraction. "They think I'm a threat," she said, her voice quieter now, almost regretful. "I was a weapon they created to fight wars, to kill, but I don't kill for them anymore. They want me back. They think if they own me again, they can control the galaxy's deadliest assassin." Max's throat tightened as he processed her words. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about power. This was personal. The Syndicate had created her, molded her into the perfect weapon, and when she had the courage to break free, they sent everything they had after her to bring her back, to reclaim their property. Max's heart pounded. That's messed up. They want to own you like some kind of weapon. Zer didn't respond immediately. Her gaze shifted toward the far end of the corridor, her eyes scanning the shadows, alert for any signs of danger. "Yes," she said, her voice cold. "They've been hunting me for years. I've run, but it's only a matter of time before they find me again." Max's mind raced. He wanted to help. But how? How could he possibly help her when it felt like the whole galaxy was chasing her down? Before he could voice his thoughts, a sudden noise interrupted his musings. The sound of footsteps, low, steady. A dozen of them closing in on their position. Max's blood turned to ice. Zer's head snapped toward the sound. Her expression hardened in an instant. "They've found us," she murmured. Max's breath caught in his throat. His hand instinctively went to his blaster, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Not against these odds. Zer reached for the small communicator clipped to her belt and spoke in a low, urgent tone. "We need to move. Now." Without waiting for a response, she turned and bolted down the hallway, her movements so swift and precise that Max had no choice but to follow. His heart pounded as he sprinted behind her, barely keeping up. He didn't know what she planned to do, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to end well unless they found a way out, and fast. They rounded a corner, and the sight before them stopped Max dead in his tracks. The hallway opened into a large bay, one of the station's maintenance sectors. But what caught his eye wasn't the industrial machinery or the dim lighting. It was the dozen Syndicate mercenaries blocking their escape. They stood there, weapons drawn, expressions cold as ice. At the front of the group was the leader, the one who had confronted them earlier. He looked far too pleased to see them again. "I'm done playing games, Butcher," the leader said, his voice a cruel sneer. "This time, you won't escape." Max's hand tightened around his blaster. This was it. No more running, no more talking. Zhos stepped forward, unfazed. Her posture was as rigid as a blade, her eyes locked onto the mercenaries. There was no fear in her, only cold determination. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice low, calm, predatory. Max's pulse skyrocketed. He didn't know how she planned to get them out of this. But one thing was clear. Zhos was ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Max felt like he wasn't running for his life. He was running with someone who would make sure they survived. Together. Max's heart raced as he stood side by side with Zhos, facing down a dozen Syndicate mercenaries. The cold, calculating expressions on their faces were enough to send a chill down his spine. But Zhos wasn't afraid. She never was. The leader, the same man who had taunted them earlier, stepped forward, his grin widening at the sight of Zhos. "You're surrounded, Butcher," he sneered. "This is it. There's no way out." Max's eyes flicked to Zhos, who remained eerily calm, her violet eyes scanning the mercenaries. She didn't flinch, not an ounce of fear in her. He didn't know how she did it, but right now, standing next to her, he could feel the weight of her resolve. It was the most terrifying and most comforting thing he had ever felt. Zhair's lips barely moved as she spoke, but Max could hear her words as clearly as if she had shouted them. "You think you have me cornered? You think you've won?" The leader chuckled darkly. "You're the one who's cornered, Butcher. You've been running from us for too long. This time, we finish it." Max's hand instinctively went to his blaster, his thoughts swirling with panic. He wasn't a warrior like Zhos. He was just a cargo hauler, a man who had been dragged into a world of danger and violence he didn't understand. But he was here, and he was going to fight. "Max," Zhos said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Get ready." Before Max could even process what was happening, Zhos was in motion. It was as if she became a blur, her body moving with the fluidity and speed of something not quite human. In the blink of an eye, she had closed the distance between herself and the nearest mercenary, disarming him in a single seamless motion. The man went down with a grunt, his weapons skidding across the floor. The mercenaries scrambled, drawing their weapons and rushing toward her, but Zhos was already a step ahead. She moved like a shadow, a perfect storm of precision and power. She kicked one mercenary to the ground with brutal force, and in the same breath twisted another's arm until the sickening sound of a crack echoed through the room. Max's pulse thundered in his ears as he watched her dismantle the Syndicate's forces one by one. Each move was so swift, so effortless, it felt like watching an artist paint with violence. The air was thick with tension, the sound of blasters and shouts, but Zhos moved through it all with a deadly grace, like she had been born for this. Max didn't have time to think, only to react. His blaster came up, and with a quick squeeze of the trigger, he shot the nearest mercenary, aiming his weapon at Zhos. The man fell to the ground with a startled scream, his weapon clattering to the floor. "Nice shot, Max," Zhos called without turning, her voice tinged with the faintest hint of amusement. Max grinned despite the danger. "I'm not completely useless." But just as he was starting to feel like he had a handle on things, the leader stepped forward again, his face twisted in a snarl. He wasn't backing down. Not this time. Zhos turned to face him, her eyes cold and unwavering. "I won't let you win," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The leader laughed. "You think you can take me on? I'm not some lackey you can kill with a flick of your wrist. You're not the only one with power." With that, he lunged at Zhos, his weapon drawn. But she was faster. She moved with a predator's instinct, dodging the strike and using his own momentum to send him crashing into a stack of crates. The leader groaned, struggling to get up, but it was clear he was no match for Zare's skill. Max's heart skipped. This was it. The final confrontation. And it was all going to end now, one way or another. Zare reached down, grabbing the leader by the collar and lifting him off the ground effortlessly. "You should have stayed away," she said, her voice icy. "You've made your mistake, and now you'll pay for it." Before Max could even think to stop her, Zare's hand tightened, and with a swift, crushing motion, she incapacitated him. He went limp in her grasp, unable to fight back. The room fell silent. Max stood frozen, watching her, still trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. The mercenaries were gone. The Syndicate was defeated. And yet, the tension didn't quite lift. Zhos was still a warrior, still haunted by the past she was running from. She dropped the leader's body to the floor, her expression unreadable. "We're done here," she said simply, turning toward Max. Max was still catching his breath, but he nodded. "Yeah, I think we are." He moved toward her, still a little unsure of how to deal with the fact that the woman standing before him had just taken down an entire group of Syndicate mercenaries like it was nothing. He had seen her in action, but this was a whole different level. Zare's gaze flicked to him, and for the first time, Max saw something in her eyes that wasn't cold. Something like relief, or maybe just a hint of gratitude. It was fleeting, but it was there. "You're not what I expected," Zare said, her voice softer than usual. "But I appreciate your help." Max smirked. "Well, I wasn't exactly planning on getting dragged into a war with the Syndicate, but here we are." Zare's lips twitched, just barely. It was the closest thing to a smile he'd seen from her. "Let's get out of here," she said, turning toward the exit. Max nodded and followed her, his mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. But as they stepped out into the hallway, the distant sound of alarms blaring began to reach his ears. The station was in chaos. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Max didn't feel alone. They made their way to the docking bay where the Lucky Break waited, ready to take off. As they boarded the ship, Max glanced at Zare. He had no idea where their journey would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't running away anymore. He was running with her, and for the first time, he didn't feel afraid. "Ready to go?" Max asked, as the ramp closed behind them. Zare gave him a look, her expression unreadable but her posture relaxed. "Ready," she said simply. As the Lucky Break lifted off, Max stared out the viewport, watching as the station grew smaller and smaller. But in that moment, it didn't matter. The galaxy was vast, and the adventure had only just begun.